Hey everybody, Qroo here. You know, learning Spanish is not an easy task. It is definitely a big job. And like any big job, you should have a strategy to help you do it in the fastest, most efficient way possible. It would be like if you were suddenly tasked with moving the contents of a huge warehouse to a new location. Even if you've never done that sort of thing, you'd have to think of logistics, right? You'd be like, all right, how big is this task? Like, how much stuff's in that warehouse? How many trucks do I need? How many people do I need? What's it going to cost? How big are the items? You got to think of these things and develop a strategy. That's what you would do. Well, learning a language is very similar, but the problem is many people don't see it that way. If Spanish was that warehouse I just described, most people kind of approach it like they have a dim flashlight. They're wandering around looking at things. Oh, this is interesting. Let me take this for now. And just there's no real strategy or direction. And as a result, most people don't succeed at learning Spanish to the level they would like to. Now, I'm a guy who had to learn Spanish quickly and at a high proficiency level for work. I tackled the task like I would any other, like I was tackling that warehouse task. I developed a strategy which I continually evaluated and adjusted along the way as I became more familiar, with the task. But I succeeded. So in this video, I'm going to give you the finished version of that strategy that I developed along the way. You're getting the polished end result without all the trial and error, all right? All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. Number one thing in our strategy is to focus on learning patterns in the Spanish language. This is important. Now, whether it's your native tongue or a second language you're trying to learn as an adult, mastering any language is about recognizing and repeating patterns. That's all it is. When you were very young, you learned the patterns of your own language by listening to it for thousands of hours on a continual basis. Now, whenever someone says something that doesn't match one of those patterns, what do you say? That sounds wrong. How do you know it sounds wrong? It just doesn't match the pattern. Well, when it comes to learning a second language, a lot of people think that that is still the best way to do it. To learn like they did as a baby and just keep, listening to the language, and somehow their brain's going to start to identify the patterns. It takes thousands of hours to go that route. Now, that route's a good route if you're completely immersed in the foreign language and you are not able to speak your own language very often. Unfortunately, that's not the situation of most Spanish learners. Chances are, if you're watching this video, it's not your situation. So that's not a good way to go. But fortunately, there is a much easier way for English-speaking adults to learn Spanish, to learn these patterns. And it's just to logically make an effort to learn them. That way, once you understand the pattern, you can take any words, pop them into the pattern, and actually create grammatically correct sentences you may never have seen or heard before in your entire life. I understand if you're skeptical, people always are, so I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you've never spoken Spanish in your entire life, and I ask you to translate these sentences. I want to participate. I want to continue the conversation. I want to verify the information. Now, since we're talking about patterns, you probably noticed a pattern right there. They all start with I want. So I'm just going to teach you that, okay? Yo quiero. Yo quiero. Now, nice thing about Spanish is, you see that yo? We can actually drop that because you can drop the subject in Spanish if it's clear from the verb conjugation, which it is here, or context who we're talking about. So we're just going to be saying quiero, quiero. Can you say that? Quiero. Now, we could just try to memorize individual words in Spanish and try to learn the rest, or maybe try that total immersion thing where I'm just listening all the time and hopefully somebody says one of these sentences one day so I can learn it. Or we can just learn more patterns. I like patterns, folks. Let's do patterns. One of the big advantages you have as an English speaker learning Spanish is there are so many similarities in the two languages, especially when it comes to vocabulary. So we're going to be using a vocabulary pattern for this particular one, and this is a cognate trick. Cognates are words in two languages that share the same roots, so they're often very similar or identical. In this case, they're going to be very similar. This is our tion-cion cognate trick. The majority of words in English that end in tion can be converted into Spanish by changing the T to a C, putting an accent over the O, and then you're just changing the pronunciation. So, I'm going to give you this one. Observation. Is that a T-I-O-N word in English? Yes. So let's convert it into Spanish. We're going to change that T to a C, put an accent over the O, and all we're going to do is change our pronunciation. Observación. Observación. Don't get too fixated on the pronunciation aspect right now. You'll get that down. Just focus on the pattern. We just made a noun, right? With our examples, I mean, that is helpful here and there, which you can already see. I still need verbs. I need verbs and I want a pattern. Well, let's take this one to the next step. If the word we created in Spanish using our T-I-O-N, C-I-O-N cognate trick ends in acción, A-C-I-O-N, we can make it a verb. Take a look at the one we just made. Observación. Does it end in acción? Yep. So we can make it a verb. All we're going to do is drop the C-I-O-N and put an R. And of course pronounce it in Spanish. Observar. Observar. This means to observe. This is not a conjugated verb, right? It's in the infinitive. But a nice thing about Spanish is that if we have a conjugated verb, we can plug in infinitives right after it and we don't have to conjugate them. And fortunately, we have a conjugated verb that we've already been playing with. I want. So if you just want to say, I want to observe, and then we could plug something in, how would you say that? Quiero observar. You starting to see the pattern? Okay, now I've taught you the pattern. Now let's take a look at these sentences you may never have seen or heard before in Spanish, especially if you're brand new to Spanish. You would not have known how to translate these. And let's see if we can do them now that you know the pattern. I want to participate. We're going to go slower on this one. I want. Quiero. To participate. First thing we want to think of is a T-I-O-N word from participate. Can you think of one? Participation. It's better to go in order till you get good at it. Can you change that into a noun? Yep. Change the T to a C, put an accent over the O. Participación. Participación. And it's all coming down to pronouncing those vowels. A-E-I-O-U is A, E, I, O, U. You'll get it. You'll get it. Now we need a verb though, right? Does participación end in acción? Yes. So can we make it a verb? Yes. We just drop ción and add an R. What do we get? Participar. Put it all together. Quiero participar. I want to participate. So let's go on to the next one. I want to continue the conversation. Now, just with the patterns I've given you, you can translate everything in here except for the word the, which I'll help you with, all right? Let's start with I want to continue. What's I want? Quiero. Let's talk about continue. What are you already thinking about? Continuation, right? Can we make that into a noun? Yep. T to C, accent over the O, continuación. Does it end in acción? Yep. So we can make it a verb, right? What's the verb? Continuar. We're going to plug it right in. I want to continue. Quiero continuar. That's what we got. Now what do we need? The conversation. Let's jump right to conversation. Can you do that one? T to a C, accent over the O. It's all about pronunciation at that point. Conversación, conversación. Now, in Spanish, all nouns are either masculine or feminine. And the word the will change depending which one it is. The good thing about this T-I-O-N, C-I-O-N cognate trick is that all of the nouns we're making are feminine, which means the word the will be la. And for plural nouns, it will be las. This is a singular one, right? I want to continue the conversation. Quiero continuar la conversación. See, the most difficult thing here is probably the pronunciation because now you understand the pattern. So now you're like, wow, I'm changing my English into Spanish. With these patterns, I just need to really work on my pronunciation. That's how it works, see? Should we even bother to do the third one? Because I mean, now you got the pattern. Should we just move on, talk about patterns? No, let's go ahead and do it. All right, we'll go ahead and do it. See if you can just do this one without my help. I want to verify the information. Think you got it? Quiero verificar la información. Quiero verificar la información. Did you get that? Quiero, we already knew that one. Quiero. And what about verify? Did you think verification, verificación? Verificación ends in acción, right? So we drop ción, put an R. Quiero verificar. Information, información. We know they're all feminine, and the is la. The big question now is, how do you continue to learn patterns as a Spanish learner? Well, one way is to focus on the grammar of a language. And I know people hate the word grammar. They're like, oh, do I have to learn grammar to learn Spanish, Paul? Grammar is a scary term for folks, but it's essentially a blueprint of patterns. Somebody's already identified them, wrote them all down. Just makes it easier. Another more exciting and entertaining way to learn patterns is to watch my videos. I focus on patterns all the time because that's how I learned it, that's how I teach it. If you'd like a more organized course to lead you through the language, I do have one. That's my Spanish Master course. Takes people from beginner and shows them all these patterns to get them up to speed quickly. I have it over on my private learning site, the Qroo Spanish Crew. The URL's on the screen, and there's also a link to it in the description section. I'd love to see you there. All right, let's go on to what's next in our strategy. I mean, I could talk patterns all day. I think it's amazing. But let's talk, we need more strategy, right? The next thing you have to do is practice the language. You're learning these patterns. You've got to use them. That way, you reach a point where you can be conversational in Spanish. So how do you do that? That can be a challenge for a lot of folks. I mean, you could always fall back on friends and coworkers. The big problem with that is, you tend to start the same way every time. You start with your greetings, how was your day, and then you don't talk about anything else. So you get really good at that part of a conversation, and then you kind of fizzle out, right? Blah. Another good option is to hire an online native speaker to help you. Now, when you do this, look for the country you're most interested in focusing on their Spanish. Whether it's Mexico, Spain, Colombia, whatever you're looking for, because there are differences, in the areas. But by focusing on a set country, you can work on your ear for the language better, their accent, their word choice, colloquialisms, big advantage there. Now, not everybody has the opportunity to get with an online tutor whenever you want. Let's say you want to practice for like 10 minutes, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and you want to talk to somebody. There are some other resources now because of technology. One of them is language AIs. There's a lot of different AI language tutors out there. I've tried a ton of them. A lot of them are lacking. I recently tried Langua's AI, and it was phenomenal. I think this thing's outstanding. I have an affiliate link to it in the description section of this video. Highly recommend it. You can practice your Spanish on there, talk about absolutely any topic. It has AI tutors from different areas, so it speaks that particular Spanish. It uses those colloquialisms, that accent. And there's even other languages available at no other cost. So when you sign up, if you want to do Spanish or French, or my wife's using it for Italian, you have that option. So check out my link in the description section. If you use my link, it just helps out the channel. All right. Now let's talk about, other than practicing, what else do we need to do? Well, you need to keep working on your ear for the language. And the only way to do that is just through more exposure, more exposure, more exposure. Now I know that as soon as you start listening to it, it doesn't sound like anything. It's just, I used to kind of compare it to porpoises. I was just getting, clicking noises. It doesn't make any sense. Well, the whole developing an ear thing has different components to it. One is, as you start to learn vocabulary and words, you'll start to pick those out, right? But tuning your ear to a language is just like, tuning a radio back in the day where it was like staticky and you're just trying to get it just right. It's not something you can consciously do, but it's what your brain's doing. Now, I know the younger folks watching are like, I have no idea what a tuning radio, what is Paul even talking about? Okay, if you didn't understand the tuning radio analogy, just ignore that. Think exposure, lots and lots of exposure to the language. It's a funny thing when you start to develop an ear. At first, nothing sounds like anything. And then you start to pick out words. You're like, oh, that guy said dog. Oh, I got dog out of that. And then later it's a little bit more. He's going to the store to buy, I don't know what that was. I don't know that last part. That's how it progresses. Now, when you're listening to somebody who's speaking very deliberately and clearly, you're obviously going to understand them first. And that's generally the news. So we have so many resources to continually listen to Spanish. I use YouTube all the time. You can watch the news from all over the world. Chances are you're going to understand them first because of the way they're speaking. And then you'll get that confidence, hey, I understood the news today, I'm doing pretty well. Then you'll watch a movie from that country or a movie in Spanish and you'll be like, oh, I'm missing so much. He's mumbling. I don't know what that meant. It's all part of that progression. So you want to have a combination of different sources. Say the news and movies, shows from that country. I don't always like the shows. So what I tend to do is I really like Korean action movies. And there's a ton of them on YouTube and they're dubbed in Spanish for some reason. So I watch a lot of Korean movies in Spanish. I find that helpful. Whatever it is for you, just think, I need to expose myself to this language as much as possible. Even if I'm at work and it's playing in the background, you know, YouTube's playing or maybe the news is playing, just to tune your ear, all right? Really, really important. The next part of the strategy is to read in the target language as much as possible. And this isn't hard to do either, right? You're looking at websites, so just read Spanish websites as much as possible. And don't just skim them, you know, like you would in English and try to get context. Slow down and read the lines. Look how the sentences are structured. Look for little, like, snippets or patterns in the language, like sentence starters you like, or something you can plug into your own Spanish. For example, a sentence starter I really like is en cuanto a, regarding, in reference to. Sentence starters are great because they give you a moment to think as you're making sentences in real time, so you can plug in vocabulary or patterns and you're making your sentences. En cuanto a lo que dijiste ayer, in reference to what you said yesterday. That's a nice long sentence starter. You know, you're having a conversation with somebody. I'm thinking of my response. Bueno, en cuanto a lo que dijiste ayer. Wow, I've got all kinds of time. Look for those opportunities, put them on a word list, study your word list, be committed. And that brings us to the last aspect of the strategy, and I just mentioned it, be committed. You have to make a commitment to learning this language. And that means dedicating time every day. Now I'm going to tell you, if you come up with, you know, some unrealistic expectation for yourself, like, I'm going to spend 2 hours every single day studying this language, chances are it's not going to happen. Might start that way, but then later you're like, oh, I got busy today, I had to work late, I didn't hit it today. So don't do that. My recommendation is you say, I'll never do less than 30 minutes a day, ever. And it doesn't have to be at once. Maybe I put 15 minutes in at breakfast, watching some of Qroo Paul's awesome videos and learning patterns, or possibly reading, you know, in Spanish, or reviewing some word lists from the day before. And then in the evening, another 15 minutes before I went to bed. Maybe that's all I got in. On some days when it's raining or I'm bored, or perhaps Qroo Paul's, you know, video lessons are particularly good, so I'm binge watching them, then I can put in more time. Maybe I'll put in an hour, maybe an hour and a half, you know. Well, there you have it. That's a breakdown of my strategy. That's actually the short Reader's Digest version. I could go into a lot more detail, but most of you would be pretty bored. If you'd like to know more about patterns, my strategy, everything else, remember, you can watch the videos here on YouTube or pop over to the Qroo Spanish Crew, my private learning group, and learn all about it, okay? And ask me a ton of questions. I love talking to the folks over there. I have a great time with the members. Well, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. And until next time, hasta luego.